So we're in the third of the 48 ways. The first way was constant study, and we talked about how life is really to gain wisdom. Wisdom is the basis really for all advancement in life. The second thing that we talked about was Shmiat HaOzen, that you have to really listen. And the interesting point about that was that it did not take for granted that we actually take things in, because we are so conditioned to interpret something a certain way that often we don't even listen to what's coming into our ears. So the first point really was, no, back up, listen to what's coming in your ears, avoid the temptation to interpret, and really then try to understand what another person's saying and to challenge your opinions and assumptions. And that led to definitions, a discussion about definitions, which was very interesting, because if someone can really have a clear definition, if two people who are debating a topic have a clear definition, they would really be able to come to unemotional resolution of conflict. I think often it's because you're throwing words around without a clear definition, and it's kind of hyperbole. So that was the second class. So the third that we're up to now is Ba'arichas Sifsasayim. And that means arrange it on your lips. Articulate. In other words, to get wisdom, to get understanding, there needs to be a process of articulation, speaking and saying things out loud. Very interesting point. I just want to back up a little bit, because we don't always appreciate that there's incredible power to speech and to language. Now, it's no coincidence that modern civilization is usually earmarked to about 5,000 years ago. That's when civilization came into play, and they were able to make technological advances, tools, cities, and civilization. And that capacity came directly from a capacity of using language. They don't know how language was developed. It was a miracle. But language was the capacity, the vehicle, which allowed for progress. Because if you can't articulate something, you can't bring it from a thought in your head into reality, into the world. So language was really the vehicle which brought something not real, something spiritual, something vague and amorphous into reality. And it really paved the way for progress. And that's very fascinating, because if you think about a human being, the mouth is the bridgehead between thought and action, between spiritual and physical. The words that we say, that we articulate, is the physicalizing of the spiritual thought process. It's very fascinating. Your mouth is at that bridgehead. So it's the command center really for bringing physical things into the world through spirituality. It's fascinating. Language rules. A good friend of mine, we were talking very recently about the Israel-Arab conflict, and the whole Palestinians and the occupation. And we're doing a nightly series this week about it, so it's in my mind. And he told me that the whole conflict has really revolved around linguistics. Edward Said, who was the professor at Columbia, he was a linguist. He was the one that's coined and started the idea of Palestinians and their movement and their country. And you say it long enough, even though it's a bit of an illusion, because there was never a people called Palestinians. There was a country called Palestine, which happened to be created by the Romans when they kicked the Jews. When they conquered the Jews, they wanted to get rid of all Jewish connection to the land. So they called that land that we called Judea at the time, they called it Palestina. That was where it came from. There was never a Palestinian people, unless you want to say the Jews were Palestinians. So interestingly enough, he told me he could solve this problem very easily. This is how he would solve the problem. When CNN or any reporter would go up to a settler in the West Bank and say to them, "You are occupying Palestinians' land," the settler should say, "What are you talking about? I'm Palestinian." What do you mean you're Palestinians? I'm Palestinian. I live in the country called Palestine. Palestine's just the same. Is this another word for Israel? Israel and Palestine, it's been called that for 1,000 years. I'm Palestinian. So he would say if every Jew got up there and said they're a Palestinian, they would throw the whole debate up in the air. It's very true, because now the Palestinian illusion was built upon that there's this construct called, it's us and we're Arab. And he said, no, I'm Palestinian. And it's fascinating, but because the debate and the reality is defined by language. Another example of that, which you might relate to, even if the other one is a little bit counterintuitive. They talk about the occupation. Now, it bothers me to no end that they call it the occupation or the occupied territories, because 20, 30, 40 years ago, the Jews, we used to call those not the occupied territories, but the disputed territories. Because for the Jewish point of view, the Israeli point of view, those territories were never accepted by the Arabs. They were no man's land. The Jordanians gave up all claims to that land. So we say those are disputed territories. We've had a claim. We've lived in these biblical lands for thousands of years. We have just as much of a claim to the territory as the Arabs have a claim to the territory. They're not occupied territory. They're disputed territory. But do you understand that in accepting that language, and even now when Israeli diplomats respond to questions about occupied territories, instead of basically saying we don't hold of that and they keep using the word disputed, they're basically capitulating to the narrative and therefore giving the narrative reality. Even though the narrative that it's their land versus ours is no more real one position than the other, but by using the language and by capitulating to the language, you're creating reality. I think it's a fascinating idea. And if you really this goes back to the very beginning story in the Bible, where God formed man from the dust of the ground, and he blew into his nostrils a soul of life, and man became a living being. Now, Onkelos, the Aramaic commentator, says a living being means a speaking spirit. The power that God breathed into Adam roughly 5,780 years ago, which coincides with all linguistics, that language started that time. This was the gift that made man man. It was the gift of speech. It was the ability to take thought, spirituality, and put it into the world in a physical way. So that's like an introduction to this way, which is now arranging it on your lips. What does that really mean? Now, Siphosayim, the word Siphosayim, lips, is very interesting because it also means in Hebrew the shore, like shore, like the shore of a river, the two banks of the river, the shores. Because what do the lips do? They kind of they divide up from the bottom, and that's what the shores of a river do. They divide one part of the river from the other part of the river, the water from the land. So what lips do is they divide and they distinguish one thing from another. And that's what this idea of speech does. The power of speech, arranging something on your lips, articulation, allows us to distinguish one thing from another, concepts one from the other. It divides and it helps us get clarity. Now, it's fascinating. I don't know how many of you have gone into a Jewish study hall, gone to a base medrash, they call it, whether in Israel or in America. But when you go there, I remember in Jerusalem is base medrash, and I happened to have met a congressman. Actually, at the time, he was a state assemblyman. He and his wife came to a discovery seminar that Aisha Torah was putting on in the Old City. And I ended up, from that seminar, staying and studying for a number of years. So about a year and a half later, after I started studying, someone comes to me and says, hey, there's a congressman outside. He and his wife, and they were with another congressional couple, and they came to visit me. And they couldn't believe the study hall, because when you approach 50 yards away, you hear this din, this huge racket, like 1,000 voices are yelling at each other, and it's like thunderous. And they're used to a library. That's where you go to write and to study and to collect your thoughts. And in a Jewish study hall, it's full of speech, full of articulation, full, and that's the Jewish approach. It's actually fascinating because when I've had people over my house and I work with people for many, many years, introducing them to Judaism in different ways. So one of the things people do is they pray. They start praying. Maybe when they were kids, they learned Hebrew, but they start getting involved in prayer. They might come in and do the after blessing, the benching at a Shabbat meal, or say even some blessings, out of a book. But I find it's very fascinating when you see newbies do this. Often they don't say the words in the siddur, in the prayer. They don't say the words in the blessing. They don't say the words in the benching. They read the words. They're so used to when there's a book in front of them with written words on a page, they're not used to saying those words actually for real, out loud. What they do is they read the words. They don't even realize it. Often I have to point out to someone when they're benching, no, you have to read it. You have to move your lips. Same thing with prayer. You have to move your lips. It's not a Western form of study. Or it's just fascinating. People just don't do it. It's a hard thing to get a hold of. Again, when you go into study hall and when you're learning, you're told to say it out. Like I'm reading a book. I have a book in front of me in Hebrew. I'll actually read the words and say it out loud. So what does that do? First of all, what it does is it helps you really concentrate. When you're reading and you kind of like go in and out and it's hard to stay focused, it helps you stay focused and it helps you concentrate. But more than anything, saying something out helps you clarify. I remember in high school, the teacher would ask a question or they would say something, a theory or whatever it was, and I would have a great answer or a great question to ask the teacher. And you put your hand up and you calling me. And as soon as you start, how many times has this happened to any of you? As soon as you start saying the question or saying what you're about to say, you realize it wasn't a question at all. In the process of articulating the thought that you had in mind, the clarity that comes from articulation, you realize it really wasn't so all it was cracked up to be when it was in your head. So the most important thing of really saying things out is that it gives you clarity on what you have in your head. Because the things in our head is sometimes very vague, very ephemeral, not worked out. It's sort of a lazy man's way of kind of operating in the world. So the rigor, the habit that's formed from saying things out, from reading your learning, even if it's weird. In Hebrew, I'm used to it because that's what we do. But even in English, you're reading something about Torah, you're reading something about life, say it out, read it out. It takes something vague and it really clarifies it. The other thing is that what it gets you in the habit of doing is it gets you in the habit of really distilling words into what the takeaways are. I mean, how many times you go to you'll hear a Torah lecture or you'll hear even a Devar Torah, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and someone will say, what did they say? And you really can't summarize it. It's kind of frustrating actually. You'll hear a lecture, you'll come away, he was great. What did he say? I don't know. The analytical ability, the habituation to take what you're hearing and to summarize it. He made these 3 points, A, B, C, D. This was the takeaway. Part of that takeaway also can be a slogan. Once you have what the main point is, you make a slogan to remember it. This is how you build up wisdom. This is how you build up clarity in life. The other thing actually good about this, we mentioned it last week, is that say you're even having a debate with somebody, you're sharing differing views. By saying, okay, let me get it straight. Let me repeat back what you were saying, what your argument is. How often do we do that? We don't usually do it, but what that does also is it makes it makes it more real. It takes something that's in your head and it concretizes it, gives reality, and then you can examine it and analyze it. It's tremendously, tremendously important. Now, for those of you, I would just say, since it is a little weird to us, a little foreign to us, maybe we should start when we learn Torah. If we read a Torah thought, an essay, we're learning the Chumash, the 5 books of Moses, we're whatever Torah thing we're reading, maybe then is when we should try to get into this habit, Because really that's all it is a habit. Say the words out loud. They will have more reality, more meaning. You'll be more focused, and you'll really understand more what you're about to say. But another way to help concretize and help make things real in this fashion, in this path, is writing things out. Now that some of you may be familiar with that. Some of you may journal, but that's a really good thing to do as well. You go to a lecture, you hear, write it out. 1 sentence, 2-sentence summary. It gets you in the habit again of concretizing and taking something that was fuzzy and making it clear. That's the idea, because we want it to. Why do we want clarity? Because we want it to inform our decisions. Ultimately, we do want to make decisions. We do want to act, but unless we get our wisdom clear and our understanding of life clear, our actions aren't going to be decisive. Our actions are not going to be effective. Our actions, literally, our physical world, is only as effective as the thoughts and the communication that precedes it. And it's very interesting because it brings me to this next point. We're kind of turning the page, and we're moving very close to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And it's interesting because Rosh Hashanah, as many of you might know, is the head of the year, Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is all about thought, is all about getting our minds back in sync with God's plan for the world. Like God's got a blueprint, God's got a plan, and I'm kind of getting my mindset jiggered and readjusted in concert with God's plan. That's kind of what Rosh Hashanah is. It's really a holiday about thought. And then as we move to Yom Kippur, we have a lot of speech. We have a lot of declarations. We make a lot of declarations that I made this mistake and that mistake, I'm going to do better. And many, many, many of these declarations are actually about speech. I believe 40% of the declarations, the Al-Chet and the Al-Shamnus, the quote-unquote confessional, is about speech. And the reason we're so focused on speech on Rosh Hashanah is, as I mentioned before, is because if you get in the important point of changing our behavior, we make a mistake that it actually is at the level of action. Meaning, if I am impatient and I snap at my mom, my wife, that's what I got to fix up. But the truth of the matter is that what we really have to fix up is the thought and the speech, the communication that puts me in that situation. Or to take a better example, because that was an example of snapping, example of speech. Say a person will eat too much, or a person will cut corners at work, an action. So you have to work on what is the base, what is the thought process, what are the things that I'm thinking and I'm communicating that are getting me to those actions. If you get on top of your communication, you get on top of what you're thinking about. What you're thinking about is more holy. What you're thinking about is more ethical. What you're thinking about is more sensitive and more uplifted. Then you're going to be less like, then you're not going to act in ways that are antithetical to what you're thinking about and how you're communicating. Imagine if a person never, as a very crude example, a person never cursed. So obviously, automatically, their actions would be less crude. Automatically. It would put them on a framework where they're only thinking in more positive, uplifting, healing type of language, not low type of language. We don't realize that the basis of Rosh Hashanah, the basis of change, the basis of becoming a good person is not at level of action. The basis of becoming a good person is the level of where are you thinking, what are your beliefs, and how are you communicating those beliefs and putting those beliefs into action. Now, the next idea of arranging things on your lips, why do we actually arrange things on our lips, is because when you say something, it has more commitment to it. So this is the next step as becoming a greater person. Once you clarify those thoughts and clarify what you really want out of life, and we all have ideas. Say that I really feel I need to make a commitment to being healthier, or I need to curtail, I don't know, I need to do a better job at talking to my children in a nice way. So usually we keep it in our heads. Usually we keep our resolutions in our heads. Imagine you got into the habit of saying, I am going to watch my weight tomorrow. I'm gonna do my best to not have that drink after dinner, which sort of triggers me, or I'm going to only be positive tomorrow, uplifting to my children. Now you think it might be corny or sound corny, but just the act of articulating what you want, and you usually leave in the realm of thinking, actually makes a commitment. I know my father-in-law, he always used to do this, and he would say, because he always had struggles with his weight, so he would basically tell everybody, I'm going on a diet tomorrow, or I'm going to do this tomorrow, or I just want to let everybody know. I first thought I was a little weird when he said it, but this is what he was doing. He wanted to put it out there in words to make it more of a commitment, to more solid, and he wanted some accountability to it. So this is the real deep power of articulation, besides clarity. Clarity is the number one goal, but also in the realm of resolution and moving forward on what we want to do in life, the more we can articulate it out loud to ourselves, it's as if our good inclination inside of us will hold us accountable. If you leave it mushy, if we leave it as a wish, most of those times those wishes go unheard and unacted upon. And kind of the last 2 points I want to make, the first is work on giving yourself pep talks. In other words, once you articulate, once you know what your values are, once you get into the habit, give yourself little pep talks. This is what I want to do tomorrow. This is how I want to be with my wife. This is how. Give yourself a pep talk. And as we said before, turn it into slogans. In Judaism, we have slogans like Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, Lord God's one. My whole life is one. Realize God's one. He's with me all the time. Gam Zu L'Tova. This too is for the good. That's another good slogan. The third slogan that I remember off the hand is, if not now, when? Imlo Akshav Amosai. If I'm not going to do something good now, when? So sometimes I think a lot of times slogans get us off the chair, get us into action. Now, one thing you have to know about slogans, though, you have to change your slogans from time to time, because all slogans can stop losing their bite, right? So you might have to come up with, change your slogans, rotate your slogans from time to time. So the last point I want to make is a deep point, but I think it's also quite helpful, is that one of the advantages or outcomes that will happen once we start articulating more of our inner thoughts and our inner feelings, emotions, and thoughts, besides the clarification that's so very important, besides working out what we believe and what we want to do, besides making commitments, which will actually help us get more things done in life and be more self-actualized, what it also does is that it will, by articulating more and more of what we used to think in our heads, other things that we don't articulate will become more aware of. What I mean is, a lot of times we say negative things to ourselves inside. I'm a loser. I always make those mistakes. I always do this. It's like a dialogue. There's like a running dialogue that we have inside of ourselves. Sometimes it's positive, but a lot of times there are a lot of negative messages that we hear inside. We don't articulate, but we hear. But once we start articulating our more positive aspects and the wisdom we have and the resolutions we're making, all of a sudden these voices will almost seem like foreign voices. We'll become more aware of them. A lot of times we're not even aware. It's some part and parcel of who we are. We're habituated to calling ourselves out, to beating ourselves up. By the process of articulating more and more of the things in our lives, we'll wake up to this ongoing broken record or tape or MP3 that we have inside, and we can listen, we can hear it, we can disavow it, and we can change the tape. We can substitute it with our clarity. We can substitute it with the things we woke up to. And little by little, a lot of those inner voices which rule and run a lot of our lives, particularly our psychological disposition, we can really make a very, very big change. So anyway, that is the Biarichas Sifasayim. It's something I would recommend to everybody to really, clarify and articulate, and start with Jewish topics, start with writing a little bit more. I'm telling you, in the beginning, it's kind of weird, but it really, really will change your life. I'm telling you, my learning, when I articulate and I work it out, and oftentimes I'll be walking around and saying, okay, it's this point A, point B, point C, right? And that's what we should be doing in our lives. It'll really, really make us greater people. Today, no one will think you're crazy, because a lot of people walk and they talk and you think they're, nuts, because they got their Bluetooth on, or they got their phones and they're speaking away. So no one's even gonna, 20 years ago, they think you're crazy. Today, you'll fit right in. But anyways, anybody have any questions or comments that you'd like to throw in before we break? Okay.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
So I know the halacha is you're supposed to just, when you pray, only you should hear yourself,
Correct.
Nobody else really next to you.
Correct.
So does that really apply to bench also? Because I was discussing with my son the other day.
Benching is fine. If you do a Birkat Hamazon, you could say it, because you usually sing it together.
You don't have to hear yourself. No.
You should definitely hear yourself. You should hear yourself. Yes. You should hear yourself whenever you say a blessing, or you say any blessing or any prayer. You should definitely hear yourself. But you only have to do it as loud where you hear it, and you could do it in a way that you hear it, but not the other person. That's generally what I do. Like, say it loud enough that I hear it, but not them. And you're obviously talking when you're not benching together. When you're benching together, you can say it. It doesn't matter if you say it out loud, because you're kind of benching in unison. But if you're benching on your own, you say it loud enough that you're not going to bother them, but you're going to hear it. Now, I find that when people get, the more people are used to saying things out loud, and they're used to Jewish study and Jewish study halls where everybody's saying, then they don't get bothered when you're saying it, they're saying it. When people aren't used to saying things out loud, that's when they start to get bothered when they hear a pin drop. It's something that just takes a little. I just noticed that's what happens when you get used to all saying it out loud, more of your studying, your praying, your blessings. Then it becomes less and less of a problem.
Okay.
Just what I found.
Yeah. All right.
But okay. So anyway, it's a very interesting. It's very not Western. This idea of saying, speaking out your learning, speaking out your arguments. It's not Western. It's very Jewish. It's a key to clarity. It's a key to getting clarity in life. Okay, Peter. Good to have you on the line.